Hi, I'm Coralyn Martin,
And I'm Leslie McNabb.
and we are the co-owners and co-founders of the Recovery Revolution. And what you're about to see is a little snippet from a Q&A that we did in our exclusive 6-month recovery program for partners and families of those who are in need of recovery. So in this Q&A, we talk a little bit about goals and how you can use the goals that you set to anchor yourself in how you establish your boundaries and how you interact with your loved one. So stay tuned for a little bit of exclusive content from a Q&A. And if you want more information about that program, we'll have a link at the end of the video. Bye.
Okay, we have a second question. And this question comes from Nicole. And she asks, how do people make time to go to rehab since it's usually a place you have to go for an extended period of time? How do they do this and not possibly create more instability in their life, like losing their job, kids, home, etc.? Good question.
You're speaking everyone's fears and why most people don't get help. That's exactly the inner monologue. That's the inner voice of so many people who struggle with addiction or mental health problems, is like, no, if I do that, I can't let this thing go. This addiction, this struggle is what's keeping me alive. I can't let that go to fix it because then everything else will go wrong. This is the only thing that's helping me. That's really how the brain restructures when you are struggling with substances or even mental disorders that start to develop as like an addictive behavior. Is you're dependent on that thing. That thing is the thing that is providing you what you think is stability. So that's a really good question, and it's just kind of funny to me because it's such a common one that has to be dealt with our partners, with our loved ones, because that's the question, or that is the assumption that they're all making. So if we're able to answer this question, that's great, because that means you all will know the answer to that question when it comes up in your families or with your loved ones. So yeah, Leslie, do you want to start on that one?
Well, I wanted to say, just in my personal experience, this is exactly what the rationale that my partner had as well. You know, he's a father and he was barely making ends meet to pay his rent as it was. Of course, paying for the addiction also was part of the issue there, not being able to pay for things. So it was just all the spiral of like, I'm going to lose this, I'm going to lose this, I'm going to lose this, looking at all the things that I'm going to lose. And interestingly enough, you know, when it came down to it, the landlord was very understanding and compassionate. And he ended up starting a new career after, you know, going into treatment facility. And, you know, he has a wonderful relationship with his daughter now that's like based on trust and honesty and all these things. So, you know, I just wanted to name that I've been through that experience, and yeah, those fears are definitely real and all the things that could possibly go wrong. And in our case, there was so much more to gain. But as far as like thinking about, you know, right now, when I was in my teacher training, so I was a teacher for 19 years, and we were talking about behavior modification. So if our student had a behavior that we wanted to help or set a goal for to modify, you know, our teachers told us that it might get harder and more challenging before it gets better. So the first thing you might see is all the things that, you know, change is really hard, and it might cause all kinds of things to kind of unravel right in the beginning. But those are necessary in order to get to the change. And then you can start to rebuild. So that just really brought that to my mind as well, that things might get harder. It might seem harder for a little bit. Anything to add there?
Yeah, actually, you shared your experience. I'm going to share my own because I think this is a universal one. And so the more we can talk about how common this feeling is or this concern is, I think the better for people. That was the same struggle that my partner went through. What was this, like a year and a half ago when he went to rehab? Was it was about a 6-month process to actually convince him that rehab was even viable. I remember in December, he decided, he was like, okay, I'm done. I can't keep doing this. I can't live like this anymore. Sat on the couch and cried with me and another friend, and we had a plan and we knew what we were going to do, and we started to implement it. But then the fear sets in of, I can't be gone for a month. If I'm gone for a month, all of these things will happen. I can't be gone for 6 months like my other friend was. If I'm gone for 6 months, we're going to lose our apartment. If I'm gone for 6 months, all of my friends are going to think I'm weird and they're not going to respect me and they're going to stigmatize me because I will have been in rehab. I've got to stay here. I've got to stay relevant. I've got to stay involved in my social life. I've got to still be this provider that I think I am. And it's like Leslie said, like, you think you're providing all this stuff, or oftentimes people who struggle with mental illness and addiction think that they're providing all this stuff, not recognizing how much of a struggle their lack of recovery is creating. So it's like, yes, thank you for paying rent when you pay it, but the fact that we're often late paying it is a stressor to me. Or the fact that, $500 a week disappears in booze and drugs, like that is a stressor more than the amount that you provide. And I would be much more comfortable living on my own at that point, like recognizing how to communicate to them that their problem is a disproportionate problem to the solution they provide, without letting them, this refers back to Hunter's question as well, without making them feel like they're not doing enough. Because they're trying, obviously, they're still trying to show up correctly and do what they can. So it goes back to understanding, like, if your ultimate goal is recovery, what needs to be done to achieve that? If your ultimate goal is healing and happiness and peace in your life, and like happiness and joy for that person as well, and their own healing and stability, then how do you line up your actions and your behaviors to communicate with them in the best way for the best possible outcomes, to relate to them so that they have the best understanding of what you're saying and aren't viewing everything you're doing and saying through a filter of judgment or fear, because that fear of loss, that fear of losing your relationships, losing your friendships, losing your family, losing your job is both something that keeps them from recovery and also something that fuels the addictions harder. And I wanted to say that what ended up happening with my partners, there are a lot of different rehab options that actually work, that don't require as much sacrifice, or that allow for more flexibility. The reason that we started the recovery revolution is so that this recovery process can start at home and families and loved ones can avoid blowing up their lives for the sake of recovery, because that is possible. You don't have to have this cataclysmic falling apart in the recovery process. That being said, it still is going to require some level of sacrifice, whether that sacrifice is just a week, that sacrifice is a month of your time. Even if you don't sacrifice anything tangible like that, like you still keep the person in the house, you're going to be losing parts of them for a time. Like they're going to be deconstructing their entire emotional core. They're going to be deconstructing their mental health in a way that they can rebuild it. And a good analogy I like to use for that is the idea of like trimming the fat or burning off the dead wood. Like, in order to get to the good stuff and in order to have the positive outcome, you do have to sacrifice. So you do have to do something that looks like it's a worse scenario. So burning off dead wood, it's like, oh my gosh, why is that field on fire? Or like, when you burn out the crops and you see it on the side of the road, it's like, wow, everything's on fire. It's like, yes, so that it can then grow better and become green. And that's the process. That's the life process. Life in general requires sacrifice for improvement. And it's our recognition that there's potential for improvement that we use to decide what sacrifices to make, if that makes sense. I don't know if I said that in exactly the best way, but asking yourself, not just, oh, well, what if this happens? Because that's getting stuck in worry, but like really evaluating, is it going to be worth it? And deciding, is this a gamble? Is this a risk that we're willing to make? Because every major decision in life does have a level of like calculated risk, and knowing that, okay, if the outcome is this much better than what our current experience is, then it's going to be worth it to make this sacrifice of not getting to see. For example, I've heard of so many women whose partners are in rehab, and they get very focused on, oh, I just miss them so much and I wish they were home. And if you wish they were home when they're struggling with addiction, then that really doesn't sound like you're focused on your goal of them getting better. So in all of these questions, like remembering that transitions are more painful than the change itself, and keeping your focus on the goal and not on the fear. Because if you're focused on your goal and you let your goals and your principles and your beliefs guide you rather than your fears and your worries and your like what ifs, because the what ifs are going to be there, but they don't have to be the most powerful thing. I know we've talked about like negativity bias, how our brains are going to look for the scary thing. Our brains are on high alert trying to protect us from saber-toothed tigers, and they're not there, but our brains are still wired to find that stuff. So looking around, oh, here's a bad thing that could happen, here's a bad thing that could happen, here's a bad thing that could happen. Letting your brain run the show like that is really how you lose control of making more powerful decisions, and decisions that line up with your goals and what you want. And that's the process that keeps you stuck where you are. Went on a little walk in the park there, but I hope I got to the point. I hope I answered the question.
It was great.
Something.
It was great. Yeah, I think focusing on your goals, starting with why, like why do we want to do this? You know, it brought to mind the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and his is more about like, you know, career or starting a business, that sort of thing. Like, why do you want to do this? But I think it applies, the concept applies. It's like starting with why, and keep coming back to that when there are things that kind of get in your way.
Because your brain's going to try to hijack the show. Your brain is going to try to hijack, steal the show, take over. And that fear is what keeps people from making changes that they need to make. So recognizing that when your brain does that, they're like, no, you are not in charge of me. You're not in charge of me, brain. You are just a tool, and I will use you. And your brain will be like, oh, you're using me? And you'll be like, yes, sit down.
Well, I hope these answers are helpful to your questions. Keep the questions coming. If you have a follow-up question, you can always ask that as well. And we will be back next week.